Right, a text question here from Mick, who says, since the de-escalation in the Ukraine war has been mentioned, what is the panel stance on Russia, and how do we ensure de-escalation? Clive?
We totally opposed the invasion of Ukraine. We support the rights of Ukrainians to determine their own fate. We also support workers in Russia who are attempting to organise against Putin. But we also have to understand that Putin is a product of the West as well. In fact, without treading on too many toes, the Tory party should hand back the donations they got from Russian oligarchs, for example. And actually, by the way, Peter Mandelson, let's remember him, and he's links and liaison with Russian oligarchs as well. Putin was encouraged to integrate with the West, but only on the basis of their commodity production and so on. And frankly, it was a clash that was coming. We oppose totally that the invasion of Ukraine, and the only solution, bluntly, is to build strong, united movements of workers across Eastern Europe to resist nationalist politicians who are perpetuating this terrible war.
David Kurten.
Well, I've spoken about this at length many times over the last 2 years, and you can't take what's happened in the last 2 years in isolation. This comes on the back of what the West did, the CIA and Victoria Nuland particularly, ousting a democratically elected president in 2014, Yanukovych, because he decided he didn't want to join NATO and he didn't want to join the EU, which is their right. What the West has done, the collective West, is put in a puppet in Poroshenko and then another puppet in Zelensky, and we've encouraged him to...
Well, Zelensky won an election.
He won an election in 2019 on the basis of peace with Russia, and he did a bait and switch at the behest of the deep state in the West, who basically controlled him.
You really have swallowed the Putin propaganda, haven't you?
It's not Putin's propaganda, it's actually reality, and it's actually what I'm talking about. So
it's a very strange reality.
Well, it is reality. I mean, you've just interrupted me there, so let me just finish and continue. So there was absolutely no need for the West to get involved in this on any side. We should have been trying to de-escalate from the beginning in February 2022.
So we should have just sat back and let Russia invade a sovereign country.
There was a peace deal in April 2022 that Putin and Zelensky worked out in Turkey with Erdogan. Boris Johnson went to Zelensky just after that, and the next thing we know, Zelensky had said, no, we're not going to make peace.
This is pure Putin propaganda. You should be ashamed of yourself.
It's actually what's happened. I'm not ashamed of myself, and I'm actually saying the reality of the situation.
How much land should we let Russia take, then?
Well, if we had not gone in and agitated this and escalated and supported Zelensky to escalate, there wouldn't have been any land taken at all. Obviously, you had the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, who were Russian, who had been bombed by neo-Nazis attached to the Zelensky regime for 8 years. And
we might as well have Vladimir Putin sat where you are.
Well, I mean, that's just an insult.
You're an absolute disgrace.
That's an absolute disgrace.
No, that's
an absolute insult. And you can't call me a disgrace.
It was meant to be.
You shouldn't call me. I'm not going to have. You're not calling me a disgrace, and that is really not good moderation, because that
it may not be good moderation, but I'm just reflecting what virtually every single person listening to this programme is saying. I want to hear from Hans.
And we need to de-escalate.
You're not going to like what I've got to say, Ian.
Fine.
I'll tell you what it is. I agree with him almost 100% about every
you don't surprise me at all.
Well, there you go. But the thing is this. A lot of people like to think to themselves that this is all Putin propaganda. It really isn't. This is reality. The fact is we've got a mainstream media that's telling us how to think, how to do things. I am not a Putin apologist. I couldn't whatever about Putin, okay? But the point is the people of Ukraine have been put in a position to be at war with Russia for no reason whatsoever.
Apart from the fact that Russia has invaded them.
Listen, Ian, they wanted peace, or they were told they're going to have peace, and they chose not. And the Americans and Boris Johnson and everything else have decided to carry on feeding money every single day to the Ukraine. Sorry, it's making a noise. To the Ukrainians, and all they're doing is trying to weaken Russia. So they think. All they're doing is money laundering money for weapons industry from the military-industrial complex. And anything else you want to say about it, for me, I'm 100% with him. And I'm not a Putin apologist. I'm actually a realist. The mainstream media want to make us feel like we're Putin apologists. We're not. We're looking at what's happened.
Okay,
all the time we're escalating,
David, we've heard quite
500,000
enough from
Ukrainians
you.
have died.
Clive.
We've got to stop that.
I thought you asked me first. You haven't asked William yet. But
sorry.
Well, I'm happy to take another bite. But
I'm so appalled by what he said. I must have forgotten your
It's the
contribution.
happy.
I have a slightly different
William.
view. I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine was utterly reprehensible, and I think any nation-state democrat has to stand with Ukraine in this. Basics, absolute basics. I think the West is in an awful position because 85% of the population of the world is represented by states that don't take this seriously at all and is trading with Russia without any problem at all. That's the difficulty we've got. Really, the people that are standing with Ukraine in this, which you describe as sort of nation-state democrats and so on, are Canada, the United States, the EU, South Korea, Japan. It's not, the rest of the world is taking all the fungible assets, all the oil, and that's the problem. Now, in terms of I don't want this conflict escalated. I've argued, one or two Tory MPs were arguing for the RAF to intercept Russian aircraft inside Ukraine. I'm against that sort of escalation. I think that's very foolish.
How do you de-escalate it? That was a question.
The sad thing is, Ian, I have doubts as to whether Russia can be beaten. That's the problem. And I fear the worst, actually, for Ukraine. I think it'll go on until Russia decides to stop. And I think, actually, the other thing that people don't think about, but actually partition is very common in conflicts after armistice. I mean, it's not just the history of...
But Ukraine is already partitioned.
I know it is, and that's the de facto... Yeah, and you won't... And the old Kissinger thing, you won't get back at the peace talks what you don't have on the ground. That's a sad thing. It's an absolute disaster.
Can I just add one thing? That my personal opinion on Keir Starmer is this, and George Galloway said it, and I'll say it again. I think within 6 months, if he gets the majority that he gets, we're going to end up with British troops on the ground in the Ukraine because we've got a media that's feeding us how we should go and save this, save that.
I'm against that. I think
we need to make sure that our troops don't end up going into a hot war zone, for other people.
Do you think if that was going to happen, it would have happened already?
No, it's going to happen when he ends up with when he gets a 400-seat majority. He'll turn and go, I've got the mandate of the people to do whatever I want, including getting our troops. I mean, he's already got 900 troops in Estonia or somewhere else in those places, and I can't see them not doing that.
A lot of people are experts on what Starmer's going to do.
No one Tony Blair part two.
Seriously, I'm a bit staggered, really, because we seem to be forgetting nobody or no ordinary person in the Ukraine or in Russia benefits 1 inch from this war. That's the reality.
I agree.
That's true.
The Russian speakers in Ukraine who were discriminated against under the Ukrainian regime are not being. Are not enjoying life in the Donetsk provinces or in Crimea now. Let's be blunt about it. And the reality is that it's hard to see a way forward, except there is war weariness. Russia, if it has another round of conscription, there'll be more opposition there. There's opposition now growing in Ukraine against the war as well. And we have to rely ultimately on the people of the two countries saying enough is enough. It sounds optimistic or utopian, but frankly, this is a war that has no benefit for ordinary people.
Well, we're agreed on one thing, Clive. We're agreed on one thing.
I'll tell you one thing our listeners seem to be agreed on, judging, and I'm scrolling through all these texts here, which Hoz can see, but the other three can't, if he wants to see. It doesn't make very good reading for you or David.
That's
People
fine.
are absolutely appalled by what you've both said.
Absolutely does not bother me in the least.
We will move on to a different subject.
So the science actually does not accept any longer this idea of born gay or necessarily, born with any particular orientation. People's sexuality develops and changes and is fluid and is on a scale, as you described, 0 to 100, whatever. And I know people who are ex-gay, and I know people who have moved from straight to being gay as well.
There's no such thing as ex-gay.
There are hundreds and thousands of people who are ex-gay. You can go and look them up.
They might say they are. They might say they are, but we all know the truth.
Well, you're disregarding their testimony. I know many people who are happily married, having experienced, being homosexual, having homosexual desires before, and heterosexually married now, and having children, all of that kind of thing. And their own testimony is that I have changed. So, fine, you want to disregard all that testimony, fine, but the evidence is there and it's very, very clear. And lots of people have experienced change and lots of people accept that. Peter Tatchell
all of those people have suppressed their sexual desires because they want to conform with what they think society demands of them.
Well, that's your view. I mean, that's not what they would say.
No. They probably wouldn't, because it wouldn't suit, would it? If you've decided that you are no longer going to indulge in gay sex and you want to get married and have children like 90% of your friends do, then clearly they're not going to say that. But that doesn't mean to say that they don't still have sexual desires of a homosexual nature.
Well, I could point you to people who have this testimony, and have their own testimony and examples and story about what's happened to them. And I think you ought not to dismiss all of these stories in that kind of way. Fair enough, you and I are probably going to just disagree on this, but the evidence is that people's sexuality is fluid and does change, and it can change both from straight to gay and gay to straight, and sometimes with help, sometimes without help, sometimes with conversations or prayer might help that change, and sometimes it doesn't
what
need
you've
that.
Just said there, I think, is very crucial, because you've basically now tacitly approved of gay conversion therapy.
Of therapy in terms of conversations that help people on their journey to a desired outcome, which might be to change their particular sexual feelings or gender identity sense as well. Yes.
Hi, Iain. Yeah, my question is after 14 years of Tory sleaze, why is Keir Starmer just carrying the baton on? Because I'm a lifelong Labour voter, and I won't vote Labour again, and that's only after 70 days. One, because the passes, and two, because of the winter fuel payments. I think it's just and that's after 70 days. I feel disgusting, mate.
Well, you can disagree with the winter fuel payments, but that is not an example of sleaze of any. I mean, you might say, well, they're hypocrites in what they said during the election, but I think you've got to separate the policies out from maybe some of the alleged misdemeanours. When you look at this, Steve, sort of coming from outside, do you sort of just shrug your shoulders and think, well, this is just what happens in politics, or do you think that there is intrinsically something wrong with our politics, that politicians, small parties, just don't see the wood from the trees in terms of doing the right thing?
I think we've got to cut these guys a little bit of slack. Personally, they're very, very new in the role. I'm sure there are mistakes that have been made as we go along, but the country needs hope, and we're very quick to talk ourselves down. And at this moment in time,
well, the Prime Minister keeps talking us down, doesn't he?
I mean, I agree with you. I think that's a real shame. But a pro-growth, pro-business agenda, trying to change the economy for the better of all of the country, that's got to be in our interests. And I hope post the budget in 6 weeks' time, we can get back to that pro-growth, pro-business agenda.
But what effect does it have on you as a business when the Prime Minister makes a speech that is full of doom and gloom, no sign of sort of, well, we're heading to the sunlit uplands and this is how we're going to get there, but we're in a terrible state, blah, 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 it's all the fault of the wicked Tories and we're going to have to introduce some sort of very bad measures. Does that make you think, I'm not sure I'm going to invest as much money as I was going to, I just want to see how things develop? Because that's the message I'm getting from business, both small and large. We're putting a lot of investments on hold.
I think the next few weeks are pretty key, and I think taking brave decisions right now would be a very brave thing to do. So I think, the important thing is post the budget, we've got to get a positive momentum back. One bad speech in a garden, which was staged clearly for its purpose, is one thing, but the overall sentiment's got to move towards a positive sentiment. And I was very hopeful, having met Rachel and Johnny Reynolds prior to the election. They're very pro business, they're very pro growth, and I just hope that sentiment continues, because it will get the country out of where we are right now.
Barry Gardiner.
Yeah, look, I welcome what Steve said. We do need to get the country out of the mess it's in. coming back to the question about sleaze, though, that our listener put, my understanding is that Keir Starmer did actually record properly in the register his own gifts and of glasses and whatever. It was his wife's dresser clothes that were not. So I don't know why that was the case. It may have been an oversight, but clearly I think on the part of the Prime Minister, there was no intention to deceive about what he had received. It was there declared. On the wider issue around business...
Just on that, Barry, can you explain to our listeners why a family that has an income in excess of £200,000 a year needs to have clothes or glasses bought for them?
No, I can't.
No, and I think that is where people look and think, well, it's like Animal Farm.
Yeah.
They looked from left to right, they looked from beast to beast, and they all seemed to be the same. I mean, that's the problem that they've got after only 2 months in office.
I mean, I can imagine that when people are busy and somebody says, "Oh, I'll arrange a dresser to go and get some clothes for you," I can imagine that somebody says, "Oh, thanks, that's really great," but you have to understand that it can't be a gift. It can't be a gift. The optics are bad. I accept that. But on the issue of the mood and getting the economy going again, I think it is important that government shows that it's trying to play straight with people and it's not trying to hide bad news. Now, before the election, we know that there was a problem in this year's current account, £21.9 billion that was simply not funded by the previous government. We can't pretend that doesn't exist, and we have to show that we're dealing with it properly and trying to get the economy back on track. But the key thing here is how we grow the economy, and that is why I've always said we need to actually show that we can borrow for investment, but never for consumption.
Okay.
I think that's the thing that business will understand.
I was a bit, I've heard a lot of the, people coming on and saying things like, he was a dictator and he was this and so on. But, I'm one of those people that thinks that, look, when somebody's passed away, I don't think it's right, to be saying, that he done this and he done that. And again, there's a lot of dictators in the world. There's a lot of bad people in history. The way I see it is, again, this is from what I'm reading, and I don't just take one media. I look at everything. We are criticising this man over here, but a lot of the people in the other side of the world are not criticising this man. In fact, he's being praised and he's being, for example, again, it might be a controversial subject, but people like Putin, people like China, people like everybody in the Asian side are actually praising this man and saying he was a great politician, the UN included. So, it's a bit strong from our side to sit here in the West and just say that, oh, yeah, he was this, he was that, he was this. And,
well,
I don't know.
He either was a brutal dictator or he wasn't. And
Absolutely.
from all the evidence I've seen, he was behind the brutal deaths of tens of thousands of people. That's either a fact or it isn't.
Yeah. I buy into that. But at the same time, I just think, is it a fact? There's a lot of other things. Was he the main man involved with this, or was there other people behind him? We got to look at a lot of other people in history too. People were put as the front men, but the real people are behind. And again, we just use one person to say that that's a man, he done it all, but he was still walking around before his death absolutely fine. And if there was that much of an uproar about this person, why was he not arrested? Why was there not?
Well, because he was president of the regime. That's why.
But then the president of the regime, for example, there's arrest warrants being talked about for other people nowadays. But what's going to happen? Is that going to happen? All I'm just trying to say is, if he was that much of a bad person and it's proven and it's factual, he still travelled from country to country. We could have potentially, again, call this man to question.
It makes you wonder why the ICC didn't issue an arrest warrant for him in some ways.
Really, and that's what's confusing for me, because again, we talk about what I'm trying to get at, and the bigger picture here is we just need to be careful with who we're pointing fingers at. I mean, look what's happening in America with universities and Joe Biden, and he's not even listening to any of that, and it just confuses me that we have to be very careful.
Oh, so you come on the radio, you slag off Joe Biden, a democratically elected president of the United States, but couldn't say anything against an Iranian president who's killed tens of thousands of people. What a sickening attitude. What a sickening attitude.
Oh, thanks, mate. That's great. Thanks, Ian. But I think at the same time, Joe Biden hasn't said anything about the students that are getting pummeled all over the show. No one has said anything. But it's okay for him to,
you make me sick. You make me sick, because it's just typical to come on the radio and slag off America and then think that, nothing possibly bad could happen in Iran. The Iranian regime we have to give it the benefit of the doubt. Honestly.
It isn't. Everybody else isn't, Ian. This is not what people think, mate. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, it's the Iranians that have phoned in tonight. I know exactly what they think, and I'd rather believe them than I believe you.
Ian, I have a lot of Iranian friends, and this is what I'm confused about. And I have not called in before, and the reason I've called in is because of that fact. Because as much as you're saying one thing, I'm not hearing that from other Iranian friends that I have. Very close friends.
Why do you think they're in this country? Why do you think your Iranian friends are in this country rather than Iran? It's because they've escaped the Iranian regime.
They go back to their country every year, in fact, twice a year, and they're happy. They're just in this country for work, mate. It could be whatever, but their long-term goals, their families are still...
Yeah, of course they are. Of course they are.
That's fine. I mean, we agree to
Seriously.
disagree, but not everybody's allowed to have their own opinion, mate.
OK. All right, Ash, thank you very much indeed. My nose grew a little bit longer then. Right, let's move on to... So will voter ID become a barrier at the upcoming local elections? Darren?
I think our fear about it is that people will forget, go to the polling station and then get turned away and maybe not go back again. So we're encouraging voters, and this is a message to all voters, irrespective of how you vote, to remember to take your photo ID to the polling station. And if you don't have a photo ID, I think you maybe have a couple of days, I can't quite remember the deadline, to be able to apply for an alternative form of identity verification to prove your identity at the ballot box. Look, did we think this was an important thing to introduce? No, not really. The argument for doing it was voter fraud, but the evidence was that there was very little, if not any, voter fraud. But it is what it is. And we just want to remind people to take their photo ID with them when they go to vote.
Some of the Labour candidates for next week's mayoral elections in England's major cities have claimed that the introduction of voter ID requirements is comparable to efforts by the Republicans in the US to make it more difficult to vote in areas with more democratic-leaning voters. Do you subscribe to that? Do you think that's what's behind this?
Well, there are some interesting things, isn't there? Like the list of allowed photo ID, for reasons I do not understand, permits a bus pass if you're over 65, but not a bus pass if you're under 21. And I've not seen any explanation as to why that distinction was made. And I think Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was then in government, I think, and introduced this, kind of said subsequently that he felt that this was an attempt to try to influence voting. So I think there's maybe some legitimacy to the argument, but we in the Labour Party, it's the law. People have to bring their photo ID. We're not kind of kicking up a fuss about this. We're just saying that people need to remember to bring their photo ID with them when they vote.
Will you repeal this in government?
I don't know, actually. It's a good question. I only see economic policy, so I don't know what our position is on it. You'll have to ask.
Well, it's refreshing for you to say that, actually.
Well, I like to say I don't know when I don't know. I get told off sometimes for doing it. But I think, come back to me when we publish our manifesto and I'll let you know. I've got my lines.
Have you?
Now, I've got quite extensive top lines, which I'm not going to read through because I suspect we're running out of time. The question, will Labour scrap voter ID? We say we have seen multiple problems emerge with voter ID in the May elections last month, and we've raised these issues time and time again with ministers. Every legitimate voter should be able to vote in our democracy. I agree with that. We're still waiting for the government's review of the impact of the voter ID in the May elections. We need to know when it's coming. Ministers are required to hold a review into this discredited policy, and there must be no more dither and delay.
That is our military actively involved in the use of those weapons.
But so what?
So what? That means we're actively involved in that conflict.
But we've already agreed that we already are.
Well, do you agree that there should be NATO members on the ground in Ukraine?
We're not operating under the... Well, you asked me a question. Let me answer it. We're not operating under the auspices of NATO here. We're operating as an individual country, just as America is, just as Germany is, just as France is.
No, NATO's made it pretty clear that they're standing against this, that this is a NATO operation in the same way that Libya was. Except
it's not. It's not a NATO operation. It is an operation where NATO countries are involved, but there is a difference there.
So do you think it would be okay for UK armed forces to be on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, I think that's a whole different argument, and no one's suggesting that.
The reason I say this, Ian, right, is if we've got UK forces on the ground, which to a degree we do have with the operations of these weapons, it would be fair for Russia to say, those are UK forces, we will attack the UK we in a forceful way. Do we then get to say under Article 5 we want help? Because at that point we've been the aggressors. It wouldn't have been the Russians. That would have been
come on. Oh, come on. I mean, I think you need to remind yourself, Nick, as to who actually started this by invading a sovereign country.
They started it with Ukrainian. They didn't start it with the UK. So if UK has got men on the ground, Russia can say, we need to defend ourselves against it. I'm not saying Russia in the right here. I'm just saying the way it looks and the way it comes across.
Well, I think you're overthinking it. If you've been following the US election and Donald Trump's re-election, I mean, there have been some quite astonishing moments over the past week. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, let me tell you what Donald Trump has announced. I am thrilled to announce Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services. For too long, Americans have been crushed by the industrial food complex and drug companies who've engaged in deception, misinformation and disinformation when it comes to public health. So what does Donald Trump do? He appoints somebody who has engaged in the deception, misinformation and disinformation when it comes to public health. I mean, this man, Robert Kennedy, is an ultimate conspiracy theorist. I mean, it's very rare that my flabber is gasted, but I genuinely didn't think he would go that far. I thought he'd appoint him to some sort of advisory role, but to actually have this man in his cabinet.
That is so rude. It's so stigmatising. Exactly as you said at the start, Ian, if we'd come up with that, Labour would have made such a big deal of it.
I'm told by a former Conservative SPAD that this paper had come across Minister's desk. I don't think it was actually the Department of Health. It was a different department.
I'm glad it didn't come across my desk, I can assure you.
Within about 30 seconds.
I mean, it is absolutely appalling. So imagine if you were somebody who was overweight and looking for a job. What are you to think now? I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. Or indeed, if you are overweight and working, what happens to you now? You're going to lose your job because clearly the government has made a link between being fat and not getting a job. I mean, it's just totally bizarre. They're two different tracks. It's a hateful, horrible thing to be doing. Exactly as others have said, there's no long-term evidence of side effects and what it does to you. There's also not the supply. There's a lot of constraints on the supply.
I mean, it's been presumably approved by NICE, so it must be safe.
But
I think Andrea,
not as a cure for unemployment.
That is a bit much, isn't it, really? Okay. But at the end of it all, what are we talking about? We are talking about helping people be healthier so that they can work, right? We're talking people healthy because at the moment they aren't, because population has become much sicker, Andrea. As everyone knows, when they try and get their GP in the morning, everyone sees around them, as everyone's seen as life expectancy has stalled.
The unemployment issue is
life expectancy falling in the poorest nations, in the poorest parts of this country. We are a very unhealthy part of this country. And you were the health minister, you're right, but nothing you were doing was working. In fact, it's making the country worse.
That's not true. You need to stand that up. What we were doing was sorting out primary care, the primary care recovery plan. Pharmacy First is absolutely a game changer for primary care. People are able to access much greater support for their own health issues. There are huge problems with obesity in this country, as there are right across the developed world. But your government saying, right, the answer is we're going to jab you all because you're fat and lazy. That is absolutely disgusting behaviour.
I think the key word
as bad as cutting the winter fuel allowance.
The key word there was recovery. primary care recovery, because you need recovery when you can't get a GP appointment at 8 a.m. You had to recover from 14 years of poor decisions that you were making.
Really,
and more broadly, absolutely, this country or this government is going to invest to make sure this country is healthier. I'm really proud of what this government has done or is doing. I'm really proud of what we did last time we were in government as well.
Just because you say that doesn't make it true. That is a hateful proposal to make, and it's completely unenforceable. You won't have the supply, you won't have the belief in it. All you'll do is make people who are already very unhappy with themselves much more unhappy. Evil.
How are these Palestinians supposed to defend themselves when not only are the settlers attacking them, but IDF soldiers are actually watching on and encouraging them and egging them on, and even snipering kids with precision shots into their heads?
Is that true?
Those are very hard accusations that have no base, as a matter of fact, because...
Save the Children have reported it. I've had Human Rights Watch, I've had Amnesty International in their Crossing Thresholds report. There are multiple reports from multiple NGOs and Israeli soldiers admitting to it live on TV with Matt Fry, Iain Dale, colleague on Channel 4 News.
I'm sure you're taking your information from sources you believe are reliable, but all I can tell you is
lying?
No, I want to tell you what I know. What I know is that in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, the way we call it, there has been increase of terrorism in Jenin. Jenin has become a huge terror hub. Our military was operating in Jenin to prevent terror attacks. We've seen so many terror attacks in the last year just because of the war. People forget we still get to have terrorists coming from Judea and Samaria and attacking our cities, and innocent people get killed from those terror attacks. So Israel is fighting those terror hubs, and unfortunately Abu Mazen is not capable to control. And in the end of the day, we are in a point where those terror hubs are threatening our people. I completely agree that if someone is committing a crime, he should be taken to court and pay the price for it, but definitely not familiar with any fact about killing children. No one is interested in killing innocent children.
But it is a fact that there has been violence against Palestinians by illegal settlers around the West Bank.
I accept the fact that we are a country that the rule of law is very important. So if anyone is committing any type of crime of violence, he'll be taken to the courts. So I'm saying again, unfortunately, there is a lot of misinformation out there. People are trying to put blood labels on Israel, but I'm telling you, if there is one thing I can guarantee you, no Israelis
with respect, Ambassador,
are targeting children.
Jay was quoting from different reports. He was quoting reports that my very respected colleague Matt Fry has done on the issue. Matt Fry is not somebody who invents things. He does not broadcast things that are untrue. And I think just to say, well, anybody who's committed an offence can be brought before the Israeli courts is a bit of a cop-out. Now, you stood for the leadership once before. Mm-hmm. Why are you standing again?
Well, I didn't get it last time, so that's one reason. But jokes aside, I think that our party is at a crossroads. It is existential. You look at the results we had last time, and there is no guarantee that the Conservative Party is going to exist. So now is the time for us to get serious, to go bold. This country needs us. And I think that I have the leadership qualities that can get us back in contention in time for the next election.
So what are those qualities? Because we'll come on to one or two of the things that people say about you, which I'm sure you will have heard many times before. But what qualities do you have which make you stand out from the other three?
So I will talk about the things that people tell me they like about me. I've been going all around the country and meeting many members who've been very enthusiastic. And they talk about my conviction, that they know what I believe. I've been very consistent, and I've always rooted my conservative values in principles that are clear. So equality under the law, something that I pushed again and again as Equalities Minister. Freedom, whether it's freedom of speech, freedom of association, free markets, family. I don't think we talk about family enough. Citizenship. And by citizenship, I don't mean just having a passport. I mean caring about a place, wanting it to succeed, caring about the people who are there. And people like the way that I speak. They like that I'm direct. They like that I'm very forthright. But the thing they love the most is that they think that I can fight for conservative values, that I didn't allow myself to be pushed around. I defended our party, I defended our values and our principles, and they think that that's
actually annoyed some of your colleagues, didn't it?
Yeah, sometimes it did. But this is what we're here for. We're here to fight for things. We're here to fight for our beliefs, to fight for our values, not just to be managers. And I think there are many people who just want a quiet life, and actually they don't really like being politicians. They want to be managers. And my background is in engineering. This is another way that I'm different, not just from the other candidates, but from most politicians who tend to, study politics or humanities. So I think about things very differently. And I think that in the age we are in, the information age, having an engineer can be game-changing.
Well, the MP that I used to work for in the 1980s, Patrick Thompson, he always batted for engineers. He was a lone voice in the Conservative Party in the 1980s doing this. And shall we say, he's probably not one of your natural supporters, but he was very excited when he found out that you were an engineer.
Oh, really?
So, what does it mean to be a Conservative in 2024 compared to when I joined the Conservative Party in 1979? It was a very different time. Conservatism can mean different things to different people. It can mean all sorts of different things. How has Conservatism evolved, and how would it evolve under your leadership?
So it evolves to deal with the challenges of the age that you're in. What's actually interesting is that so much of what is happening now feels very similar to what happened in the 1970s. I think right now our conservatism is going to need to adapt to a world where there's so much integration, in terms of supply chains, and so much, free flow of global capital in a way that we didn't have several decades ago. A world where the borders are disappearing. We have laws that were made for a time when it wasn't that easy to get from one country to another. Those laws don't make sense in this world, and conservatism needs to adapt to that. So if you had an internationalism, embedded in your conservatism, it's quite difficult to think about having to leave the ECHR, having to leave the Refugee Convention, which are laws that were amazing things at the time, but which don't work in 2024. And we haven't quite got to a place where we're able to solve them, and we need to do that very quickly. It's one of the reasons why we're out of government, because we didn't get there.
Because you've been quite careful not to commit to withdrawing from the ECHR, unlike a couple of your rivals.
Yes, and this is one of the challenges that I have, that quite often I take very nuanced positions. I am somebody who is firmly on the right of my party, but I understand how people who are not on the right, whether in politics or out, think. And I think that if you talk about leaving the ECHR without making sure people understand the problem, all they will hear is, oh, you don't want human rights, which is not the case. I actually think that if we are going to control our borders, we probably will have to leave the ECHR. And if I'm leader, if leaving the ECHR is what we need to do, I will do so. But I don't think it's the first step. There are countries that are in the ECHR who are able to deport their criminals. We need to ask why it is that we aren't able to deport people here who need to go. And it's not to do with the ECHR at the first step. It's to do with the people who are doing these jobs, who don't really want to be doing that.
Now, you say you're firmly on the right of the party, and yet in the MP's votes, you've been eclipsed by an MP who I never thought was on the right of the Conservative Party, Robert Jenrick, but who has run quite a successful campaign convincing people that he is, using the ECHR as one reason. He resigned over immigration policy. You were expected to be leading the field at this point, and yet he is. Why is that?
Well, several reasons why, but the first is that the contest, the MP stage isn't over. It's an iterative process, and I'm very sure, as we saw in the last round, that I will keep doing better and better. But the first thing to remember is that we had an election where 2/3 of the MPs lost their seats. Quite a lot of my support was in that cohort. It's not something I talk about. A lot of my friends are gone, and that had a bigger impact on me than on other candidates, I think. And I'm still second, so I'm not that far behind Rob. But the second reason which is more challenging, is that I don't tell people what they want to hear. So I'm not offering jobs. I'm not saying support me.
They all say that though, and then you find out afterwards that they have.
But one of the reasons why I'm not right at the top is because I'm not offering jobs. I think it is important that we make sure we can bring the party together, and that's going to mean that even some people who didn't support you will have to be in the team. Not offering jobs gives you more flexibility. Otherwise, you end up just having a team of loyalists, which we've had before and which broke down quite often with the last a few prime ministers we had. We saw that happen quite frequently.
You just said a moment ago that you're firmly on the right of the party.
Yes.
The British electorate is not firmly on the right. I'd say most people would probably describe themselves as somewhere in the centre, whether it's centre-left or centre-right. What does being on the right mean? Because it implies, I think, with a lot of people, that you want to privatise everything, that you are a sort of culture warrior, that you're not a social liberal, you are a social conservative with a small c, don't believe in equality for gays, or sort of you're anti-abortion. All of these things, those are associated with the word right.
That's right. So what it means for me is, starting from those principles I talked about, being authentically and visibly conservative and not compromising on those values in order to win votes from people who probably would never support you. That's how I think about it. So, you use the phrase socially liberal. This is an interesting phrase for me because I have found that what was socially liberal 10, 20 years ago is now socially conservative.
Like what?
A really good example is gay marriage. I'm somebody who always supported gay marriage, but being supportive of gay marriage doesn't make you socially liberal. Now what's socially liberal has moved beyond that. It's now about whether you believe someone can self-ID into another gender. That's something that I don't believe in. So now that makes me on the right of the party. So that's one example. When it comes to things like border control, I am very much on the right of the party. I have very strong views about what a nation is. It's about sovereignty and control. It's one of the two reasons why I voted Leave in the 2016 referendum, when I saw that Angela Merkel could create 1 million European citizens, EU citizens, and any country could do that. I thought, no, that's not what citizenship is. I don't like this, and I think that we need more control. As it happens, we did a less than good job at taking that control and using it properly. And those are one of the things that I would want us to change, how we govern as well. So those are some of the reasons why I place myself firmly on the right of the party. It doesn't mean being a headbanger. And one of the things I want to do is reclaim the phrase right wing. It's used now in such a pejorative way, and I don't think it is pejorative. I think it's just explaining a side of the political spectrum.
Virtually everyone I speak to about you and the leadership contest, they all think that you are a culture warrior. That's the phrase that they associate with you. Now, you were Equalities Minister for quite a long period, actually. Why do people think that about you, do you think?
Because I did my job and I did it well. So equalities as a ministerial role is where so many contentious social issues sit. Race relations, anything to do with sexuality, sex, gender, religion, all of those things sit in the equality space. And what had been happening was the party had just gone with the Labour consensus that equalities is a left-wing thing, so we'll just do everything that Labour had been doing. And when I came into the job, I thought, no, this is not how we do things. I believe in equality under the law. I don't like identity politics. It's one of the reasons why I'm in the Conservative Party and not Labour, because I hate identity politics. I hate this thing of people being put into different groups and, you stay in your lane. No, this is your group. This is the kind of music you listen to. This is the party you support. This is what you watch. This is how you speak. I hate that. I want us to have a shared British identity. I want us all to be treated exactly the same. We were not doing that until I came in and imposing that. But it means fighting a lot of battles because people feel strongly about those issues. So if people feel strongly about issues and you think they're wrong, you have to come out and defend your principles and your values. Many people would rather just not talk about these things at all. Don't say anything. Well, they found it quite embarrassing to even be talking too much about race unless we were apologising for Britain's history. Whereas I'm proud of Britain's history. I think it's a great history. So it's things like like that make people say that I'm a culture warrior. I was just doing my job. And I think actually if a lot more people did their jobs the way I did, we'd probably still be in government.
Just before we go to a break, you hit the headlines a few days ago when you said that you became working class when you worked in McDonald's as a 16-year-old. Just take me through the logic of that.
Well, that's not what that's what people inferred. I said I became working class when I turned 16, when I was working at McDonald's. But what made me working class was the fact that I came to this country with no money, no friends, no parents. I had a place to stay, but I had to work to eat, otherwise I would starve. And that, in my view, is what that means.
But in your childhood in Nigeria, you came from a very middle-class background,
So what I said was that I grew up in a middle-class family, but coming here, I became working class. My dad gave me his last £100. He said, this is all we have, because all our money was gone. And this is one of the things that people don't understand, that because I've lived somewhere else and I've seen how things can go wrong, I have a very visceral reaction to bad policy here. I lived in a country where there was hyperinflation. My family's money was inflated away. It turned into nothing. I watched a government put in left-wing policies that destroyed the economy. There was capital flight. People wanted to leave. They couldn't get out. I've seen downward social mobility. We talk about social mobility in this country as if it's something that only goes up. And it is a secret that every immigrant to this country knows, that you can go backwards. And that is why I think you find a lot of people from immigrant backgrounds being very aspirational, this tiger mum phenomenon that we see, because many of them know what it is like to live in a place where there are a lot of poor people, and it can happen very quickly. And that's the point I was making. But what is interesting is the reaction to that. It is unique in this country, the way we police class, when actually a lot of people here no longer fit into the class system as it used to be. I'm not working class. I'm middle class now. But for a point in my life, when I had to walk everywhere because I didn't have enough money to get on the bus, and I was working in McDonald's, I was working class. And I don't care how many sort of private school people tell me, laugh, like James O'Brien, for instance, who's one of your colleagues, who seemed to think it was very funny. I don't need to take lessons from somebody who went to Ampleforth. I know who I am. And I was working class at that time, but I fought my way back up.
And just finally on this, what did you learn from working in McDonald's that you can apply to being leader of the Conservative Party?
To smile no matter what people say to you. You get a thick skin from doing any kind of job that is public-facing. I don't think any job really, to be honest, gives you as thick a skin as being a member of parliament. But you learn to do that. You just learn to not create a status for yourself. There's a humility that comes in doing that job that I think is important in public service. Learning to be humble, learning to put yourself in other people's shoes. There were people who would come in who didn't have any money, and they would ask for food, and you weren't supposed to give them food, and you sort of look around and just wait, and you sneak them something. You have a lot of empathy and sympathy for people who are living that sort of life, knowing that that could be you if things went wrong for you.